The moment the blade tore through Jack's side, he knew it was bad. Not fatal, but bad. The pressure in his abdomen shifted, a deep H forming almost instantly as blood soaked his shirt. The alien in front of him, a Kethian with dull blue skin and too many joints in its limbs, recoiled in horror. It hadn't meant to hit him. That much was clear. Jack staggered backward, pressing a hand to the wound. Warm blood seeped between his fingers. He clenched his jaw, exhaling sharply through his nose. Human, the Kethian's voice clicked with urgency. Remain still. You are hemorrhaging. Jack let out a strained breath. Yeah, I noticed. The Kethian scrambled for the emergency comm on the wall, its elongated fingers fumbling with the interface. Jack took a slow, measured step toward a nearby crate and lowered himself onto it. Moving too fast could make things worse. He knew that much. Within moments, the medical team stormed into the supply bay. The lead medic, a tall, insectoid being with shimmering green chitin, skittered toward him, its compound eyes locked onto the wound, mandibles twitching. Do not move, the medic ordered, multiple arms already reaching for equipment. You are losing a significant volume of blood. Jack exhaled through his nose again. I've had worse. The room went silent. Every alien present turned to look at him. The medic's mandibles clicked. That is not possible. Jack huffed, though the motion sent a fresh wave of pain through his side. It's possible. Trust me. A second medic, a smaller quadrupedal being with soft, translucent skin, pressed a scanning device against his abdomen. A holographic projection lit up, displaying his internal injuries. Jack glanced at it. The blade had gone in at an angle, missing anything vital but causing significant muscle damage. He was lucky. Another inch and it might have hit something important. Blood pressure dropping, the insectoid medic said, "Human, you require immediate intervention." Jack gritted his teeth as one of the medics applied pressure to the wound. The pain sharpened, a deep, burning heat radiating through his side. His hands clenched into fists. He was trying to stay calm, but his body was reacting on its own. "Do you have human-compatible blood?" Jack asked, his voice tight. The insectoid hesitated. "We know. We must stop the bleeding through other means." Jack nodded once. "All right." A third medic entered, carrying a sterile field kit. The translucent-skinned alien retrieved a syringe filled with a coagulant. "This compound will stabilize the wound," it explained. "It will act as a synthetic clot." Jack gave a weak thumbs up. "Go for it." The moment the needle pierced his skin, a new kind of pain flared through him. His body tensed involuntarily, breath hitching. The coagulant worked too fast. It burned as it spread through his system, forcing his blood to clot almost instantly. Jack exhaled shakily. "That hurts." The medic tilted its head. "You are experiencing discomfort." Jack let out a strained chuckle. "Yeah, just a bit." The alien medic exchanged glances with its colleagues. "We will prepare anesthesia." Jack shook his head. "No time. Just patch me up." The insectoid hesitated before nodding. "We will proceed." The translucent skin medic retrieved a dermal regenerator, scanning the wound before activating the device. A faint hum filled the air as synthetic tissue began knitting over the injury. It wouldn't heal instantly, but it would stabilize him. Jack's breathing remained shallow, his muscles stiff beneath the medic's hands. They worked quickly, sealing the wound layer by layer. The pain didn't lessen, but at least the bleeding had stopped. The Kethian who had accidentally stabbed him hovered nearby, its posture rigid with guilt. "Human eye." Jack lifted a hand. "It was an accident. Just give me a second." The medics finished their work, stepping back. The insectoid clicked its mandibles. "You will require rest. The muscle damage will take time to heal." Jack nodded, exhaustion creeping in. His body felt heavy, the adrenaline fading. The Kethian spoke again, voice low. "You say you have had worse. How is that possible?" Jack gave a tired grin. "Human bodies break. And then they fix themselves." The medics exchanged glances. The insectoid's mandibles twitched again. That is inefficient. Jack let out a breath. Yeah, it is. He didn't fight when the medics helped him onto a stretcher. He wasn't about to argue with them, not when his body was already demanding rest. As they wheeled him toward the medical bay, the Keithian trailed behind, still looking unsettled. Jack sighed. He'd deal with that later. For now, he just needed to focus on breathing. Jack's consciousness drifted in and out as they moved him through the corridors. His body felt drained, muscles sluggish, but he was aware enough to catch snippets of hushed conversation between the medics. Their voices carried hints of unease. He could guess why. The stretcher slowed as they entered the medical bay, cool air washing over him. Bright overhead lights made his eyes water, but he forced himself to stay alert. He wouldn't fight treatment, but he also didn't trust his body to stay still if his instincts decided otherwise. The insectoid medic, the one who had led the initial response, leaned into view. Its multifaceted eyes studied him. You are still conscious. Jack took a slow breath. Yeah. The medic's mandibles twitched. That is unexpected. Jack didn't have the energy to explain that humans had an aggravating tendency to remain awake through things they probably shouldn't. Instead, he focused on staying still as they adjusted monitoring equipment around him. A soft, unfamiliar hum filled the air. One of the other medics, this one with pale, bioluminescent skin, held a device over his abdomen. A translucent screen flickered to life, displaying a new scan of his wound. The insectoid's gaze shifted between Jack and the screen. The damage is extensive. We have stopped the bleeding, but your body's natural repair process is inefficient. Jack let his head rest against the stretcher. Yeah, I got that part. The bioluminescent medic turned toward its colleagues. We should reinforce the muscle structure with synthetic fibers. The insectoid hesitated. Human bodies reject foreign biological material. But Jack's fingers twitched against the stretcher. Depends on what it's made of. They all turned to look at him again. He could practically feel the weight of their curiosity. The insectoid adjusted one of the monitoring devices. You are suggesting alternative reinforcement. Jack inhaled carefully, testing the tightness in his side. It was manageable, but he didn't want to push it. Some materials are fine, mesh, certain polymers. But if you start trying to integrate something organic, my immune system's going to throw a fit. The bioluminescent medic exchanged a glance with the others. Then we must rely on stabilization rather than augmentation. The healing process will be slower. Jack gave a small nod. I can handle slow? The insectoid's mandibles clicked again, a sound he was starting to associate with contemplation. Your pain tolerance is abnormal for your species. Jack didn't have the energy to argue. Or maybe you just haven't met enough humans. The insectoid didn't respond immediately. Instead, it adjusted a control panel on the side of the stretcher. A cool sensation spread through Jack's side, not quite numbness, but enough to dull the worst of the discomfort. The bioluminescent medic observed the reaction. This should alleviate strain on your nervous system without compromising awareness. Jack exhaled, feeling some of the tension leave his body. Appreciate it. The medics resumed their work, exchanging quiet observations as they reinforced the treated area with external supports. Jack stayed still, letting them do their job. He wasn't about to interfere when they were actually helping. After several minutes, the insectoid stepped back. The wound is stabilized. However, we must monitor for complications. Your body's repair mechanisms are unpredictable. Jack huffed softly. Welcome to being human. The medics didn't respond immediately, but he could tell they were still processing everything. The Keithian who had injured him stood at the edge of the room, clearly reluctant to approach. Jack glanced at it but didn't say anything. He wasn't angry. Accidents happened. The insectoid adjusted his monitoring equipment again. Your body temperature is fluctuating. Jack let his eyes close for a moment. That's normal. Just means I'm using energy to heal. The medics exchanged another glance. The bioluminescent one noted something on a nearby terminal. Jack shifted slightly, testing his mobility. His side protested, but the pain was no longer sharp. More of a deep ache now, manageable. The insectoid studied him. You intend to move. Jack exhaled. Not immediately. Just checking. The bioluminescent medic tilted its head. Your recovery projections suggest extended rest is required. Jack didn't argue. I'll rest. The medics still seemed skeptical, but they didn't push the issue. As they adjusted the monitoring equipment once more, Jack let his breathing even out. His body still felt heavy, but at least the worst of the damage was under control. For now, that was enough. Jack stayed still as the medics finished calibrating the monitors around him. The hum of equipment filled the medical bay, punctuated by the occasional soft chime from the diagnostic scanners. His body, though no longer in immediate distress, was still in a state of exhaustion, and he could feel the lingering ache beneath the reinforced layers of synthetic mesh and clotting agents. The insectoid medic adjusted one of the displays, its mandibles twitching in thought. The bioluminescent one observed the results, its translucent skin pulsing faintly. Jack let his gaze drift to the Keithian, who still hadn't moved from its spot near the entrance. The alien's posture was rigid, its multiple joints locked at unnatural angles. The insectoid medic finally broke the silence. Your recovery trajectory is uncertain. Human biology is inconsistent under stress. Jack exhaled. That's how we work. The bioluminescent medic observed him. Your body does not prioritize efficiency. It compensates through adaptability. Jack gave a small nod. That's one way to put it. The Keithian took a slow step forward, its voice lower than before. I did not intend injury, but Jack shifted slightly, his side protesting. I know. The Keithian hesitated, then turned to the medics. Will the human recover? The insectoid's mandibles clicked. Recovery is dependent on his biological resilience. The initial trauma was significant. Jack let out a slow breath. I'll manage. The bioluminescent medic tilted its head. Human confidence in uncertain outcomes is notable. Jack let his eyes close briefly. Not confidence, just experience. The room fell quiet again, save for the soft hum of the equipment. The medics continued their observations, adjusting various readings while monitoring his vitals. Jack stayed still, letting them work. He knew better than to push his limits too soon. After a few moments, the insectoid medic addressed him again. Your body requires sustained hydration and caloric intake to support cellular repair. Jack nodded slightly. Makes sense. The bioluminescent one retrieved a container, the contents unfamiliar. This formulation is designed to replenish lost nutrients. Jack took the offered container, glancing at the liquid inside. He wasn't sure what it was, but he wasn't in a position to argue. He took a careful sip. The taste was neutral, slightly mineralized. The insectoid observed his reaction. Palatability was not a primary concern. Jack exhaled through his nose. Yeah, I figured. The bioluminescent medic noted something on a nearby terminal. Your body's metabolic response will be monitored for anomalies. Jack didn't argue. He knew they were still trying to understand human physiology. The Keithian remained near the entrance, still visibly unsettled. Jack glanced at it but didn't push the conversation further. The insectoid medic adjusted one final setting on the monitoring equipment. Your condition remains stable. Rest is advised. Jack let his body relax slightly. He wasn't about to argue with that assessment. The medics continued their quiet observations, their focus shifting between his vitals and the data being collected. Jack allowed himself to drift, his body settling into the slow process of recovery. Jack remained in the medical bay, his body caught in the slow, frustrating process of recovery. The initial pain had dulled into something constant but tolerable, and while the medics monitored his condition with unwavering diligence, he could feel the weight of their scrutiny. Every shift in his breathing, every slight movement, every minor fluctuation in his vitals was met with quiet analysis. The bioluminescent medic hovered nearby, adjusting a control panel that projected a series of unfamiliar readings. Its translucent skin pulsed faintly, a rhythm Jack had started to recognize as concentration. The insectoid stood beside it, observing the data with its multifaceted eyes. Jack let his head rest against the cushioned surface beneath him. Something wrong. The insectoid clicked its mandibles. Your body's regenerative response is erratic. It does not adhere to expected biological patterns. Jack exhaled. Yeah, it tends to do that. The bioluminescent medic turned toward him. Your tissue reconstruction is progressing unevenly. Some sections are accelerating while others remain stagnant. Jack frowned slightly. That normal for humans. The insectoid hesitated. The sample size for such injuries among your species is insufficient for a definitive conclusion. Jack gave a slow nod. So you don't know. The bioluminescent medic inclined its head. We are observing. Jack had expected as much. Alien medics weren't exactly used to dealing with human biology, and his recovery process clearly wasn't making things any easier for them. He flexed his fingers, testing his coordination. His limbs felt heavy, but at least his motor function remained intact. The Keithian, still lingering at the edge of the room, finally stepped closer. Its posture remained tense, but its voice held a steadier tone than before. Your resilience is unnatural. Jack let out a slow breath. It's not unnatural, just different. The insectoid adjusted a setting on one of the monitors. Your species relies on redundancy within its biological systems. This is inefficient, yet effective. Jack huffed softly. That's humanity in a nutshell. The bioluminescent medic observed him for a moment longer. Your discomfort remains significant. Jack shifted slightly, his side protesting the movement. Yeah, but manageable. The insectoid tilted its head. Your perception of pain tolerance is inconsistent with our projections. Jack exhaled. Pain's not always the problem. It's what you do with it that matters. The medics exchanged a glance, their expressions unreadable. Jack didn't expect them to fully understand. Pain was a complicated thing, and human endurance wasn't always logical. The bioluminescent medic made another notation on its terminal. Your recovery trajectory remains unpredictable. Continued observation is required. Jack nodded slightly. Figured as much. The Keithian's gaze remained fixed on him. Your body should not withstand such trauma. Jack let his eyes close briefly. And yet here I am. The insectoid considered his words. Your species is perplexing. Jack allowed a tired chuckle. You're not the first to say that. The medics resumed their quiet adjustments, monitoring his vitals with meticulous precision. Jack stayed still, letting them work. There was no point in fighting the process. His body needed time, and for now that was all he could give it. Jack's body was stiff when he woke. His side throbbed with a dull, insistent ache, the kind that told him moving too fast would be a mistake. He inhaled slowly, testing his ribs. Everything was still intact, though the tightness in his muscles made it clear his body was still adjusting to the synthetic mesh reinforcing the wound. The medical bay was quiet, except for the occasional beeping of monitors. The lighting had dimmed slightly, though whether that was for his benefit or just standard protocol, he wasn't sure. Across the room, the insectoid medic was reviewing something on a transparent display, its mandibles moving in small, absent motions. Jack shifted, trying to prop himself up on his elbows. A sharp pull in his side made him stop halfway. He exhaled through his nose, adjusting his position more carefully this time. The movement caught the medic's attention. You are conscious again, it observed. Jack let out a tired breath. Looks that way. The medic approached, scanning his vitals with a handheld device. Your cardiovascular stability has improved. Oxygen saturation remains within expected parameters. Jack nodded slightly. Good to know. The Keithian was still present, standing near the entrance. It had remained silent for most of his recovery, but now it stepped closer, its elongated fingers curling slightly. You slept longer than expected, it said. Jack blinked, rubbing a hand over his face. How long? The insectoid medic adjusted the display. 7 planetary cycles. Jack frowned. That's more than a day, right? The Keithian inclined its head. Closer to 32 hours in your measurement system. Jack exhaled. That explained the stiffness. His body must have shut down for deep repair. He rolled his shoulders carefully, testing his range of motion without aggravating the wound. The bioluminescent medic approached, its skin pulsing with faint color shifts. Your metabolic activity decreased significantly during unconsciousness. This suggests deeper physiological restoration. Jack gave a small nod. Makes sense? Body needed time. The insectoid observed him. Your species relies on extended periods of unconscious repair. This is inefficient compared to active medical intervention. Jack huffed softly. Maybe, but it works. The bioluminescent medic studied his movements. Pain levels. Jack flexed his hands before resting them on the medical bed. Manageable. Feels tight, but nothing sharp. The insectoid adjusted his monitoring equipment. You will require gradual reintroduction to movement. Sudden exertion may cause strain on the reinforced tissue. Jack didn't argue. He could feel the underlying weakness in his muscles, the way his body was still recalibrating. Pushing too hard too soon would only set him back. The Keithian hesitated before speaking again. Does this level of injury typically require such recovery time among humans? Jack considered the question. Depends on a lot of factors. How deep the wound is. What got damaged. How well it's treated. Some injuries take weeks. Others, months. The insectoid's mandibles twitched. Your body's repair mechanisms are highly variable. Jack let out a dry chuckle. Yeah, that's one way to put it. The bioluminescent medic retrieved a small vial filled with a pale liquid. This solution will assist in cellular regeneration. Jack took the vial, eyeing the contents. What's in it? The insectoid responded. Amino acid compounds, electrolytes, and trace elements necessary for structural protein synthesis. Jack nodded slightly before taking a measured sip. The taste was vaguely metallic, not unpleasant but not exactly enjoyable either. The Keithian continued watching him, its body language still carrying traces of unease. Jack glanced at it but didn't push the conversation. If it wanted to speak, it would. The insectoid medic made another notation on its display. Your recovery trajectory remains within acceptable parameters, though complications remain possible. Jack exhaled. I'll be careful. The bioluminescent medic observed him for a moment before inclining its head slightly. Rest is still necessary. Movement should be limited. Jack nodded. He wasn't about to argue with that. His body wasn't ready for much more than resting anyway. The medics resumed their quiet monitoring while Jack settled back onto the medical bed. His body still had a ways to go, but at least he was heading in the right direction. Jack sat up carefully, testing how much movement his body would tolerate. His side ached, but the pain was no longer overwhelming. He could feel the stiffness in his muscles, the lingering weakness from prolonged inactivity, but nothing sharp or alarming. It was progress. The insectoid medic observed him, adjusting something on a control panel. Your mobility remains restricted. Attempting full movement too soon will compromise structural integrity. Jack exhaled through his nose. Not planning to start running laps. The bioluminescent medic approached, holding a small device. We will assess muscular response to determine necessary rehabilitation measures. Jack nodded slightly. The Keithian, still lingering near the entrance, finally stepped closer, its posture less rigid than before. You are improving. Jack met its gaze. Looks that way. The insectoid medic activated the diagnostic scanner, watching as the holographic display projected a visualization of Jack's musculature. The synthetic mesh reinforcing the wound was still integrating, and some of the affected tissue remained in the early stages of repair. Your body's regenerative patterns remain inconsistent, the bioluminescent medic noted. Additional support may be required. Jack flexed his fingers, testing his grip. What kind of support? The insectoid adjusted the display. Gradual movement reintroduction. Your muscular structures require stimulation to prevent degradation. Jack gave another small nod. Makes sense. The Keithian hesitated before speaking again. You are not concerned by the unpredictability of your recovery. Jack exhaled. Not my first time dealing with an injury. You take it one step at a time. The insectoid seemed to consider this before retrieving a different scanning device. We will assess neural response to ensure proper coordination remains intact. Jack stayed still as the medic ran the device along his arm, monitoring the feedback from his nervous system. His reflexes remained functional, though slightly delayed. Your system is recalibrating, the bioluminescent medic observed. Expected, but suboptimal. Jack rolled his shoulders slightly. I'll adjust. The Keithian watched him carefully. Your adaptability continues to be unexpected. Jack huffed softly. Yeah, I get that a lot. The insectoid medic finished the scan, adjusting another setting on the monitoring equipment. We will implement structured rehabilitation exercises. This will prevent further complications. Jack nodded. All right. The bioluminescent medic retrieved a different device, this one designed to assist with controlled muscle engagement. We will begin with low-intensity stimulation. Jack let them attach the device to his arm, feeling the faint pulse of electrical signals as it activated his muscles. The sensation was odd but not uncomfortable. The Keithian continued to observe, its expression unreadable. You do not resist the process. Jack glanced at it. Why would I? The Keithian hesitated. Many species struggle with medical intervention. They resist changes to their natural state. But Jack exhaled. I'd rather heal right than fast. The insectoid medic monitored the response from the stimulation device. Your cooperation improves efficiency. Jack chuckled. Glad to be helpful. The bioluminescent medic adjusted the settings slightly before deactivating the device. Initial responses within acceptable parameters. We will continue gradual adjustments. Jack nodded. He could feel the difference already. His muscles were still weak, but the stiffness had started to ease. The insectoid medic observed him for another moment. Your recovery remains unconventional but viable. Jack exhaled. Good enough for me. The Keithian tilted its head slightly. You intend to resume normal function soon. Jack tested his grip again before lowering his hand. Soon as my body lets me. The insectoid medic made a final notation on the display. Your progress is sufficient. Continued improvement is expected. Jack leaned back slightly, letting his body settle. His side still ached, but it was manageable. The bioluminescent medic deactivated the monitors. Your condition no longer requires intensive observation. You may transition to standard monitoring procedures. Jack gave a tired nod. Appreciate it. The Keithian remained for another moment before inclining its head slightly. You endure more than is reasonable. Jack exhaled. That's just being human. The medics completed their final adjustments before stepping back. Jack let his breathing even out, his body finally settling into something resembling comfort. The worst was over. He'd heal. It would take time, but he could handle that. For now, that was enough.